Okay, today's something a little different. Before we get back to our playthrough of Bayonets and Tomahawks, which I have about 2 more action rounds in the scenario, but instead, today I'd like to go over a video I happened to stumble upon by the YouTube channel Actualol. And it's called Top 10 Mistakes Most Board Gamers Make. And I really like this video. And you may be thinking, oh, yeah, there's always these top 10 things. I'm sure there's one on mistakes board gamers make and things like that. And it's true. This one is a recent one, but most importantly, it's solid. I'm going to leave a link in the description, and I recommend you go watch it. In fact, you can pause this and go watch it right now. But I want to go with a different angle. I'm not going to go through it point by point. I'm not just going to play the entire video and interject my comments. Instead, I'll just concentrate on his top 10, specifically let him just kind of lay it out a little bit, and then I'll come in. And what I'm going to try, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cop to my guilt, because I've made most of these mistakes. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, and maybe give an example. But the other thing I want to do is, since his video is kind of board gaming in general, I thought I would give some comments about wargaming specifically, because the top 10 does apply completely. I think there's a few caveats I can add to kind of add to the conversation, as it were. So, without further ado, let's take a look at his top 10.
The fastest way to ruin a game night is to not read the rules beforehand.
I thought I won't open it until they arrive, so we can go through it all together.
If it's your game, then it's on you to know how to teach it, not learn it yourself in front of everyone else.
So I can already hear the objection here. And you're right. The last time I literally encountered someone peeling the shrink off a new game that they wanted us to play and learn it on the spot was in 1997, and I remember the game. And according to BGG, it's a terrible game, but I don't know, because we tried to learn it on the spot and just couldn't do it. That is just not the way to play board games. Now, usually on game nights, somebody has a handle on the rules. And when it comes to war games, we tend to be very rules nerdy. So I rarely encounter a situation where someone is just completely just out to sea on the rules, even if they've read them. In fact, I recall, as far as wargamers go, I recall a book. It's called Of Dice and Men by David Ewalt. I'll have to look that up later. And it's about his, fun with Dungeons and Dragons. But one of his chapters was on wargaming. When he was talking about wargaming, he got to sit down, I guess it was part of his investigative journalism or whatever. He sat down with wargamers, and wargamers we had, the painted scale miniatures with the terrain tables and everything. And the conclusion he came up after doing it was that wargamers spend 20% of the time actually playing the game, 40% of the time arguing about history, and 40% of the rest of the time arguing about the rules. And I think that's correct. But notice what the guy in the video says.
If it's your game, then it's on you to know how to teach it. How to teach it. Teach it. Teach it.
You can have the perfect knowledge of the rules, back to front, able to cite chapter and verse. But do you know how to teach it is the real issue. And that's what you really have to work on. And, and the way you learn to teach you have to practice. You have to rehearse. So I'll sit here with Bayonets and Tomahawks and play it solo. And I'll have an imaginary person over here, and I'm trying to explain to her, okay, here's how you do movement, and things like that. And I might even take notes and percentage, pedagogy, lesson plan. And now, sometimes you don't always have to go that hard, but the whole idea and the whole mentality you want to take to it is, I want to remove as many barriers to enjoyment for the other people sitting down that I've asked them to play this game So, as like he says, it's the polite thing to do.
If you're new to board games, you might think that this number on the side of the box with a clock symbol next to it is the amount of time it takes to play that game. No, that is a number plucked from thin air. You'd be better off reading the barcode. In fact, it's so inaccurate that if you finish a game in the time stated on its box, you win a trip to the factory where they make all the board games and inherit it like in Willy Wonka.
My guilt level is mea culpa. I have been deluded. I have deluded myself. I have been deluded by others on what kind of a realistic playtime we were looking at on some games. I mean, now occasionally you'll run into some honesty on the box. Let's take something like Genbin View, the final gamble, and we look on the back and there it says, tells you point blank, a full game is going to be 12 plus hours, which is going to be, multiple sessions. Now, obviously you're going to have to set the game aside and come back unless you're just into a marathon. But, the solution to this is obviously with familiar games, you're going to have to use experience as your guide. I mean, I have a realistic expectation of how long a game of Love Letter is going to take. But when it comes to new games, unfamiliar, the thing I can say is maybe do 2 playthroughs. First one to teach the game, learn how to teach the game. And the second one to get kind of a realistic feel for just how long it's going to be. And finally, the best solution is try to be honest and what's it called? Under promise and over deliver, rather than the other way, trying to get someone to play a game and just be realistic. Hey, this might take a little while, but I think it's worth it. Because if you undersell it and you're like, hey man, you said this would be an hour, and here we are 2.5 hours just slogging through this thing, you're gonna kind of wreck your relationship. Well, I'm not gonna play with you again. Stuff like that. But that's something to keep in mind.
One of the silliest things to do as a new gamer is to buy expansions. You don't need them, no matter what some overzealous reviewer might tell you.
And I would rather waterboard myself than play the game without this expansion.
So, my guilt level on this one, I'm going to give a tentative mea culpa, in that when I rediscovered board gaming, this was like 2014, I got a little carried away with the hotness. And more on the hotness later. So in that kind of feverish, I'm in the hobby now. I couldn't get just say Galaxy Trucker. I had to get the $120 super double secret anniversary edition or whatever it was that had all the expansions of it in it. And I rarely touch the expansions. Now when it comes to war games, it's a little different in that I see a lot of standalone expansions. As opposed to you must have the base game to play this, although there is plenty of that as well. But war games are so historically driven that they're driven mostly by interest in the historical stuff that it brings. So The Hunters, for instance, is a great base game about what a lot of people are going to be interested in, which is the German U-boat war in this time period. But of course, I have a friend who's like really into the Italian Navy, and so the standalone expansion Beneath the Med is perfect for him. And there'll be times when the expansion just doesn't interest me. I think one interest is the Labyrinth War on Terror. I had the base game, which I enjoyed. I got rid of it, but I think I might have made a mistake getting rid of that one. But then an expansion came out that extended the time period, from 2001 up into the Obama years, and I just wasn't interested in it. I just didn't think it really brought anything. And so I think war gamers are a little more resistant to the idea that I have to buy the base game and all the expansions all at once. So that's all I'm going to say about that one.
We've all made this mistake, playing a game at a bad player count. If you have a box that says 2 to 8 players on it, you've been sold a lie. Yes, Magic Maze can theoretically play 2 to 8 players, and my body can theoretically run a marathon, but it won't be fun and I'm never going to do it. The trouble is, publishers know that a horse that rides 2 to 8 people will sell more, so they stick a horn on it and call it a unicorn. Then we wonder why it buckles under our weight.
Oh boy. Mea maxima culpa. Let me beat my chest 3 times here. I could rant on this for 15 minutes, but I won't. But I played a lot of games at the wrong player count. The count on the box, I knew it was a lie, but I played it anyway at that count. I've ignored honest player counts on the box, and I played past it. I've been roped into games at the wrong player count. I mean, I've done it all, and it's always a mistake. One example. Let's see, Dead of Winter. Oh my gosh, I somehow got in a game of 6 people on this thing. And it was so miserable, I had to make a meme about it. The other one is Red Dragon Inn, which is not that good a game. But at game night, we had this one guy who had the super duper secret expansion, every expansion with all the little, he had little beer mugs and everything. And when he brought that out, everybody wanted to play that. And we get into these 8-man Red Dragon Inn things, and it's just miserable. You gotta get this player count stuff right. And where is it? Bayonets and Tomahawks, right here. It has 4-player rules, as does War of the Ring. Don't do it. Get a proper 4-player game. Always match the player count correctly. Now, this tends to be less of a problem in war games, I think, because the history tends to dictate the number of belligerents. And a designer is going to design for that and says, okay, we need this many belligerents. This is how many people can play this game. 1 for each of the belligerents here. And we can't really add them or subtract them. And so you can avoid things like that. See my video. Now, when it comes to whether a game is realistic for soloing, I have another video on that where we talk about how I evaluate the solo ability of game. That is a whole nother topic, which I don't propose to get into right here. But I will say the solution is be polite, but be firm. So when you get one of these kind of open-ended games where you can just keep adding players, at some point you got to say, hey, I get it. I mean, I don't like to exclude anyone. I want to get as many people in here as playing so nobody's left out. But if we add more than 5 people to this game, it just brings it down for everyone. So I just got to say no. And so you just got to have to practice on saying no. So that's what I'm going to say about that one.
I made this mistake so many times when I got into the hobby. Don't take the Board Game Geek Top 100 as gospel. I was given my first board game for Christmas by my wife 10 years ago now. It was Ticket to Ride Europe. And I was disappointed. I thought I'd been given a bad game because it wasn't in the top 10 on Board Game Geek. It wasn't even in the top 100.
No, it's not a bad gift. It's just there's 130 better gifts you could have got me if you'd done your research. That's why I sort by most popular on Amazon and gave you 50 Shades of Grey again.
I should go on to mention that he loves Ticket to Ride Europe. That's an important point I left out of the video when I edited it. My guilt level on this top 100, mea culpa. Sure, I'm guilty of this. In addition to ignoring the top, or not taking the top 100 as gospel, you should also not take as gospel what's known as the hotness down on BGG, over you scroll over the side there, and I think that's algorithm based on how much buzz and forum talk there is about the game. So it's the latest and new and shiny. Certainly nothing. You certainly got to be skeptical there. And interestingly enough, he was talking about Europe, Ticket to Ride Europe, which is at 135 on the top 200 list, I guess. This is the original, which is sitting at 198, I believe. So it's in danger of actually getting knocked out of the top 200, which is interesting because this is a fantastic game and frankly worthy to be in just about anybody's collection. It's so universal in that you can get just about anyone enjoy it. Newbies, seasoned gamers, anyone can really get into this. So, I mean, it's worthwhile, and it shows that, yeah, you cannot take that top 100 as any kind of gospel. And we might as well talk about the War Game top 100, because at Board Game Geek, you can certainly sort the list that way. And we should talk a little bit about Mark Herman, because if you look at it, for the longest time, the best Mark Herman game, or best ranked highest ranked, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Highest ranked Mark Herman game was Fire in the Lake. And as much as I enjoyed that one, I think the guy from Hamtag said it best. He says, if you think Fire in the Lake is the best Mark Herman game out there, you need to play more Mark Herman games. Recently, I looked on it, and it looks like Empire of the Sun has edged it out by like one spot or something like that. And that would be something more I agree with that. Empire of the Sun is fantastic. It is meaty, though. And that's something you got to consider, rather the fact that it's high ranked on there. It's a really meaty game, really demands a lot of you. It may not be for you. Now, we talk about something like the number one war game, which is War of the Ring. And of course, the first question is it really a war game, or is it just dudes on a map? Same thing with Twilight Struggle. That was number one for the longest time, and that sparked a lot of internet blood over whether it was a war game or not. But that's where it was. But right now, War of the Ring sits at number one, and there's a lot to sell on it. I mean, it's epic. The components are dazzling. The dudes on the map battling can be quite fun. And it's respectful of the lore, unlike some things. But it may not be for everyone. And it may not be for you. It's got a massive footprint. That does bother me. I have the game I have two of the expansions. There's apparently some more out now, which I haven't really caught up with. It goes back to that rule about expansions there. But like we said, yeah, don't take the top 100 as gospel. I mean, you got to look at a game, you got to look at the gameplay, get on YouTube, watch somebody play it, and see if I see everyone likes this game, but I just don't think it's for me. So that's it for that one.
If you've been into board games for a year or two, I can say this with full confidence that it will apply to you. Stop buying so many games. I know what it's like. All day, every day, you're thinking about them.
I love board games, me. I wish I was playing them right now.
James, could you mute your microphone? You're talking to yourself about board games again.
Yes, I have nothing to add here, because I honestly don't know how to talk someone off the ledge. Someone who is just new, fanatically into the hobby, because I've been there, and you could not reason with me, because games were all I was thinking about, and, there was nothing more for it. But he does mention this.
In my experience, this phase doesn't last forever. I reached a turning point after a few years where I stopped hoarding and I started curating. Now, getting rid of a game, for me, feels just as good as getting a new one.
And that's my experience too. It's a phase, and it's a phase you get out of. And if you're able to, if you can be conscious of it, try to get to that phase as quickly as possible where you're curating. Where in my case, I have a limited shelf space, and instead of just buying more shelves, I curate and say, okay, which games are worthy to be on the shelves, which are just not cutting the mustard anymore, and limiting yourself that way. That is my best advice for you. And in fact, when I had, several hundred games or expansions and everything, I don't think I ever got that big. But eventually, when I did my big purge of just stuff I didn't need, I didn't even bother trying to. I did sell some math trades or finding a good home for it and all that stuff. I just dropped them off at Goodwill and walked away, and it was really liberating. I had a collection of stuff. I went back home, a collection of stuff that I really enjoy and really like having around, as opposed to just keeping stuff for the sake of collecting.
I wish someone had told me this one when I was starting out. Don't rely on your family and friends to play games. If you're the one watching videos about board games, the chances are they're not as obsessed as you are, and they don't want to play as often as you.
My guilt level, mea culpa, as you can expect. And I'll tell a story about my son, who got a little bit into board games as well. And he would go to his brother and bribe him to play games and things like that. And I asked him about it a few years later, and he's like, yeah, I played games with him after he give me toys or something like that. And I still hated those games. So yes, you cannot rope your family and friends into a hobby that they're not really interested into. And obviously, when we get into the war games, if you go into a game night where it's mostly Euro players, you're going to either have to really feel out some people who are really interested in war games, which you can find some. And it's like, oh yeah, I wish we could play something like Axis and Allies or something like that. And then that you're in. And you're like, oh really? Come into my web. No, seriously. Yeah, don't try to foist war games onto a group that's, used to other stuff.
If you're new to board games, the last thing you should do is go on Kickstarter. It's like getting on a deadly motorcycle before you can even ride a bike. Kickstarter is a land of wonder, where all the prettiest board games sing their siren song, luring you in with the promise of miniatures and exclusive content. Then when you get in close, they kill you. Well, they take your money and make you wait ages to get your stuff, which is worse.
Finally, one I am completely innocent of. I have never backed a Kickstarter board game. I have done crowdfunding before, but never for a board game. There was a couple temptations. I remember, there was a U-boat one with the whole giant model, and you're just in there, just drooling and things like that. But I ended up not doing it. First of all, it was co-op, and I have a pretty dim view of co-ops these days, and I think it might have been App-driven. I can't remember. But yeah, the best way I put it is there was a little meme on Board Game Geek. Somebody put Kickstarter up there, and I think that's very illustrated. And I have no apologies about that. It's like, if they can show they can prove themselves on a Kickstarter, when it goes to retail, maybe I'll consider getting that game. So yeah, thank you, crowdfunding. You're my playtester.
This one's important. Don't make people play games they won't like. Let me tell you an embarrassing story. Back when I was relying on my friends to play games, I became obsessed with Game of Thrones, the board game, that takes 5 hours to play. I was so desperate to play it that to get the full 6 players, I invited 2 friends who have never played anything more complicated than a party game. They hadn't even watched the TV show. And when I invited them, I wasn't exactly honest about what they were letting themselves in for.
We're starting at 10 a.m. sharp. No reason. It's just nicer to play in the morning. And maybe bring a sleeping bag.
It was a disaster. They hated the game, and I felt terrible for putting them through it. So I didn't even get the fun time I was hoping for. Just a memory that makes me cringe whenever I think about it.
All right, nothing to say here. This is probably my only criticism of this video is basically that 9 is number 7. It's about, roping family and friends into playing games. The only thing I would add is he hits on it in his anecdote about not being honest with friends. And obviously, if you're in this hobby, make sure you're honest. Don't try to be sneaky. Tell people exactly what they're getting themselves into. You're not selling Amway, so honesty. Best policy.
The most common mistake that new gamers make is to buy a game just because you like the film, TV show, or video game it's based on.
I love board games. I love D-Day. I'm certain to love D-Day Monopoly.
If we've learnt one thing today, it's that a board game box is a set of lies designed to sell you the game. And nowhere is this more true than when dealing with games based on an IP. It will look appealing. It will have your favorite characters on the cover, but that doesn't make it good. Remember, George R.R. Martin did not design this game. And thank God, because otherwise you'd never be able to finish it. In fact, it might suggest it's bad. They don't have to make a game good when they know it will sell itself.
So, mea culpa. I've bought things simply because it had the name of my favorite franchise on it. No need to belabor that point. I will give you a little anecdote about a game called Forbidden Stars. And this is published by Fantasy Flight Games. But it's using Game Workshop's Warhammer 40K. This was an awesome game. I actually ended up getting rid of it. I couldn't find anyone to play it. And it just kind of collected, so I just ended up getting rid of it. That's one I sold, actually. I didn't I didn't want to just drop that one off. Anyway, the story about this game is you'll open up the box and you'll see all these amazing miniatures, and you'll be like, all right, 40K, let's go, baby. Let me find my Space Marine. Not so fast. Here's the pick. You see that little flag there sticking out of the mound? That's the Space Marine. I kid you not. And I actually got to talk. I've talked to the designer, Sam Bailey, I believe his name is. And he said, yes, this was a major bone of contention between Fantasy Flight Games and Games Workshop. Games Workshop has such a paranoia about their properties that they told the designer, you cannot have a little Space Marine miniature. Well, to make the story even worse, Game Workshop decided they didn't want to do any of these games. They basically pulled the license. And anybody who bought, Forbidden Stars, there's not going to be any more reprints or expansions. There also goes, I had Blood Bowl Team Manager, no more expansions, no more reprints on that. Just anything that had to do with Games Workshop stuff. Now, Fantasy Flight Games was completely out. And so that's kind of a lesson for designers, too. I mean, the temptation is there. Here, let's get a really popular franchise and just, we know it'll sell by that. But, whoever owns the right to that, if they suddenly decide they don't like the cut of your jib, then you're out. And so now, as far as war games go, you don't see many, what do you call it, intellectual property. I mean, history isn't like that. But of course, the lesson is just because it's your favorite period of history doesn't mean it should be an automatic buy. Not necessarily going to be a good game. I can think of an example of this is my favorite period is Peloponnesian War, and I've got several great games. Pericles' Peloponnesian War is Mark Herman's, and that's one of my favorites. He has another one, the Peloponnesian War, which is a strictly solo game, which I just don't like how it works. It's not for me. I'm not going to say it's a bad game, but it's really a procedural headache, in my opinion, and I don't like the whole swapping. Well, I won't get into it, but the whole idea is, even though that is my favorite period of history, you still got to keep your brain engaged and take a look at this game and see if it's really worth it, and then go from there. So that's the top 10 with my little blurbs in there. So thanks for watching, and go ahead and comment if you have any kind of advice for wargaming and how to avoid mistakes and things like that. But I'll see you soon.